In the weeks following D-Day, German troops began retreating en masse as Allied forces advanced across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. By September 1944, however, the overstretched Allies were approaching formidable German defenses along the Siegfried Line, which had held strong since World War II began. British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery came up with a daring plan to bypass the Siegfried Line by crossing the lower part of the Rhine River, liberating and driving into the industrial heartland of northern Germany. Code-named Market Garden, the offensive called for 3 Allied airborne divisions, the Market part of the operation, to drop by parachute and glider into the Netherlands, seizing key territory and bridges so that ground forces, the Garden, could cross the Rhine. But controversial decisions and unfavorable circumstances began stacking up from the start of Operation Market Garden. The delay gave the Germans a much-needed breathing space to bolster their defenses and rebuild shattered formations. The plan. To regain the initiative, Field Marshal Montgomery, commanding Allied ground forces, persuaded the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, to concentrate resources for a narrow thrust through the Netherlands and into northern Germany, bypassing the main enemy defenses of the Siegfried Line. The result was a 2-part operation codenamed Market Garden. 3 Allied airborne divisions would drop into Holland and secure territory and bridges in and around the towns of Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. This would create a corridor along which British 30th Corps would advance, supported by other formations on either flank. After reaching the furthest bridge, over the lower Rhine at Arnhem, the way into Germany's industrial heartland of the Ruhr would be clear. German activity and intelligence. In allowing Operation Market Garden to move forward, Allied planners were operating under the assumption that German forces in the area were still in full retreat and that the Airborne and 30th Corps would meet minimal resistance. Concerned about the collapse on the Western Front, Adolf Hitler recalled Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt from retirement on September 4 to oversee German forces in the area. Working with Field Marshal Walter Model, Rundstedt began to bring a degree of coherence back to the German army in the West. On September 5, Model received the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Badly depleted, he assigned them to rest areas near Eindhoven and Arnhem. Anticipating an Allied attack due to various intelligence reports, the 2 German commanders worked with a degree of urgency. On the Allied side, intelligence reports, ultra-radio intercepts and messages from the Dutch resistance indicated the German troop movements as well as mentioned the arrival of armored forces in the area. These caused concerns and Eisenhower dispatched his Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, to speak with Montgomery. Despite these reports, Montgomery refused to alter the plan. At lower levels, Royal Air Force reconnaissance photos taken by No. 16 Squadron showed German armor around Arnhem. Major Brian Urquhart, the intelligence officer for the British 1st Airborne Division, showed these to Lieutenant General Frederick Browning, Brereton's deputy, but was dismissed and instead placed on medical leave for nervous strain and exhaustion. Into action. On the morning of September 17, 1944, 3 divisions of the 1st Allied Airborne Army, the U.S. 101st and 82nd Airborne and the British 1st Airborne, began flying from bases in England across the North Sea to the Netherlands. The 101st Airborne was tasked with capturing Eindhoven, as well as several bridges over the canals and rivers north of that town, while the 82nd Airborne was ordered to capture territory around Nijmegen, including a key bridge over the river wall. Some 10,000 British and Polish troops of the British 1st Airborne, nicknamed the Red Devils, had the most difficult task, capturing and holding the northernmost bridge over the lower Rhine at Arnhem. German anti-aircraft defenses around Arnhem itself were thought to be too strong, and the troops were dropped up to 8 miles away, despite warnings from some Allied planners that a small coup de main party should land on the bridge itself. Only a single battalion of the 1st Airborne, fewer than 800 men, managed to reach the Arnhem Bridge, while the Germans forced the rest into a pocket near the village of Oosterbeek, several miles away. The Allies had too few transport aircraft. Due to limited numbers of transport aircraft, the British forces at Arnhem had to be dropped into the Netherlands over 3 days, rather than all at once, lessening the possibility of surprise as well as the impact of the attack. While many troops from the 1st British Airborne were dropped by parachute and gliders on the afternoon of the first day, September 17th, the 4th Parachute Brigade and the rest of the glider troops didn't arrive until the following day, and the Polish brigade was still more delayed. Also, bad weather hampered landings. Dense fog in England on the second day of the operation, as well as thick, low clouds over the battleground in the Netherlands, hampered the transport of troops as well as supplies. The supplies would have been crucial to the survival of British forces fighting to hold Arnhem Bridge. While British forces were fighting, radio communications failed. To make matters even worse, the wooded landscape and the separation between the different British battalions meant many of their radios stopped working. These failures broke down communication and made it difficult for the 1st Airborne Division and its commander, Major General Robert Roy Urquhart, to coordinate the attack on Arnhem. According to historian Anthony Beevor, Urquhart's signals officers had anticipated problems with their radios before the operation, and Urquhart himself had expressed serious doubts about Operation Market Garden, reportedly calling it a suicide operation, just 2 days before Allied planes left for the Netherlands. The ground forces. A Sherman Firefly noses past other British tanks knocked out during 30 Corps' initial advance into Holland at the start of the second phase of Operation Market Garden on the 17th of September. The British ground assault aimed to quickly link up with the airborne forces. It was launched by Guards Armoured Division on a narrow, one-tank front, with the Irish Guards in the lead. Despite massive artillery and air support, the spearhead units encountered stiff opposition as they broke through the first line of enemy defenses. In the opening minutes of the advance, 9 British tanks were knocked out by German infantry, equipped with handheld Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. By the end of the first day, Guards Armoured Division had reached Valkenswaard, south of Eindhoven, as planned. Further north, the U.S. 101st Airborne Division had secured most of its objectives, but failed to stop the Germans destroying the crucial bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal at Sun. Dutch civilians dance in the streets after the liberation of Eindhoven by the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, the 18th of September. By the end of the day, 30th Corps had reached the town and engineers were laboring to erect a Bailey Bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal at Sun. The U.S. 82nd Airborne Division had secured its positions on the Groesbeek Heights, but faced repeated German attacks aimed at dislodging them. They had taken the bridge over the River Masse at Grave, southwest of Nijmegen, but other canal crossings had been blown by the defenders. Most importantly, the Americans had not yet captured the vital road bridge over the river wall in the center of Nijmegen. Enemy resistance was stiffening, and German commanders had already decided that Nijmegen was the key to the battle. If they cut the Allied advance there, any success at Eindhoven or Arnhem would be rendered meaningless. Wrong calculation. After a successful drop, British plans soon started to go wrong. There were more German troops in the area than anticipated, and the bulk of 1st Parachute Brigade was quickly cut off from Arnhem. Only the 2nd Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel John Frost had reached the Arnhem Bridge itself, and was now set up in defensive positions around its northern end. Enemy troops controlled the southern section, and a host of improvised German units, Kampfgruppen, were being thrown into action to contain the British forces. Despite the arrival of the rest of 1st Airborne Division on the landing grounds west of Arnhem, no further progress could be made towards the embattled 2nd Battalion. To make matters worse, many British radios were not working, and 1st Airborne Division's commander, Major General Robert Roy Urquhart, became separated from his headquarters and was for a time unable to direct the Arnhem battle. On the morning of the 18th of September, the Germans launched an attack from south of the Lower Rhine against 2nd Parachute Battalion in its positions at the north end of the bridge at Arnhem. Armored cars and half-tracks from the Reconnaissance Battalion of 9th SS Panzer Division charged across the bridge but were stopped by a hail of gunfire, grenades and PIAT, projector infantry anti-tank, rounds. Despite this initial success, Colonel Frost's men were in a perilous position. They had only limited water, rations and ammunition, and German reinforcements were now heading towards Arnhem with tanks and self-propelled guns. In the following 2 days, German counterattacks would systematically reduce the British perimeter. Despite Allied efforts, the all-important bridge in Nijmegen was still in German hands. In desperation, Brigadier General James Gavin, commanding the 82nd, ordered his men to make an assault crossing of the river wall in an effort to outflank the German defenders. But the necessary boats were at the rear of the Allied column and would take time to arrive. Meanwhile at Arnhem, a final push was made by 4 battalions from British 1st Airborne Division to break through to the bridge from the west. The attacks failed in the face of heavy enemy resistance. Colonel Frost's 2nd Battalion would have to hold on alone. Bad weather in the UK prevented the Polish Brigade from flying in as planned, and Allied resupply drops, on which 1st Airborne was dependent, were now landing on ground retaken by the Germans. Hell's Highway. American paratroopers of 101st Airborne Division take shelter as enemy artillery fire hits a 30-corps convoy north of Eindhoven. German attacks against the road between Eindhoven and Nijmegen, now dubbed Hell's Highway by the Americans, severely hampered the Allied advance, which was now losing momentum. German resistance had increased everywhere, and the flanking operations by 8th and 12th Corps in support of the main thrust by 30 Corps were painfully slow. The situation was not helped by the continuing bad weather, which curtailed Allied air support operations. That evening, the bridge at Nijmegen was finally secured. The local German commander had tried and failed to blow the bridge, and British tanks were now across the river wall. However, after heavy fighting in support of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, and lacking infantry support, Guards Armored Division was in no position to continue the remaining 8 miles on to Arnhem. On the 20th of September, General Urquhart, now reunited with his men, ordered the remnants of 1st Airborne Division to form a defensive pocket around the village of Oosterbeek, west of Arnhem, with its base on the Lower Rhine. Here they fought a ferocious battle against Camp Group von Teddow, 9th SS Panzer Division and other German units. In Arnhem itself, Colonel Frost was badly wounded and his men had almost run out of ammunition and water. German tanks and heavy artillery were systematically blasting them out of the buildings they were defending. That evening, a truce allowed many of the British wounded to be evacuated by the Germans. For those still holding out, their only hope now was for 30 Corps to finally break through. Arnhem Lost. On the 21st of September, a Cromwell tank of 2nd Welsh Guards crosses the bridge over the river wall at Nijmegen. The town was now in Allied hands, and 30th Corps pushed on as far as Elst, just south of Arnhem. Here it was blocked by Camp Group Knaust. Without support, the British tanks could get no further up the exposed, elevated highway. With radio communications restored, 30th Corps artillery was able to provide much-needed fire support for 1st Airborne trapped at Oosterbeek, but little could be done to help 2nd Parachute Battalion in Arnhem. The bridge there was now in German hands, and British resistance in the town finally petered out. In the evening, the weather improved enough for the 1st Polish Parachute Brigade to finally fly in, but the result was a disaster. Many aircraft had to turn back or were shot down by Luftwaffe fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Major General Stanislaw Sosabowski and some 750 surviving Polish troops landed under murderous fire at Dryo, from where they planned to reinforce the British perimeter at Oosterbeek. Major General Robert Roy Urquhart, commanding 1st Airborne Division, stands outside his headquarters at the Hartenstein Hotel in Oosterbeek, the 22nd of September. The area was under constant enemy artillery and mortar fire. Urquhart's command was holding out, thanks in great part to the artillery of 30th Corps expertly suppressing enemy attacks. But the weather was hindering air support missions and supply drops, and only a handful of men from the Polish brigade had made it across the river. Further south, German forces launched major counterattacks on both sides of the Allied corridor between Eindhoven and Nijmegen, briefly cutting Hell's Highway. Dealing with these attacks cost valuable time. After a sluggish advance, 43rd Wessex Infantry Division eventually reached Driel and established a link with 1st Airborne, but the talk was now of evacuation rather than reinforcement. Defeat. On the 23rd of September, British airborne troops moved through a shell-damaged house in Oosterbeek. Numerically superior German forces were gradually infiltrating the British perimeter, but were struggling to completely crush 1st Airborne. A truce the following day saw 1,200 British and Polish wounded taken into German captivity. 1st Airborne Division had about 1,800 exhausted men left. Relief would have to come now or not at all, but the last desperate attempts by units of 30th Corps to get across the river in strength came to naught. The evacuation of the survivors across the Lower Rhine began on the night of the 25th of September, with assistance from the 4th Dorsets of 43rd Division. The costly British defeat at Arnhem meant that Operation Market Garden had been a failure. Of the approximately 10,600 Allied forces who made it north of the Rhine in September 1944, some 7,900 were killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Allied casualties during the operation totaled more than 17,000, compared with around 8,000 on the German side. But the Allies had at least established a lodgment area from which to launch a future offensive into the German Rhineland. If Operation Market Garden had succeeded, World War II might well have ended in Europe before Christmas of 1944, with the Western Allies marching triumphantly into Berlin. Instead, the conflict would drag on for 5 more months after that date. Not only that, but it would be Soviet troops who claimed Berlin in May 1945, a difference that would prove decisive for the future of post-war Europe. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our World War II Enterprise History channel to find more exciting historical content. And don't forget to the bell icon to be notified of our newest videos. Stay tuned for more.